presidents of Free PEN Centers. With us, PEN Ukraine. I think Andrey Kurkov has just joined. We have PEN Armenia with us, and PEN Georgia. Paata Shamugia is coming in a minute. So, none of our writers really need any... Sorry? Yes, that's great. I think I'll turn like this as well. So, none of our writers really need a presentation in Tbilisi, but I will still remind our audience about the great writers we have here today. So let me start with PEN Ukraine. President Andrey Kurkov, a Ukrainian writer, journalist, and screenwriter who has been the president of PEN Ukraine since 2018. He's an author of 19 novels, 9 books for children, and more than 20 movie scripts translated into 37 languages and published in 65 countries. His most recent work has been centered around Ukrainian struggle for freedom and independence, documenting key moments of Ukrainian Revolution of Dignity, the book called Ukraine Diaries, Dispatches from Kiev, and telling the story of the day-to-day life of people who found themselves living in the gray zone in eastern Ukraine. The book is called Grey Bees. Kurkov often contributes to a variety of media around the world, commenting on the political situation in Ukraine and the fate of its political prisoners captured in Russia, by Russia. Armen Ohanyan, whose pen name is Armen of Armenia, is a fiction writer, essayist, and literary translator. He holds a BA in philosophy from Yerevan State University and the graduate certificate in translation, CTRA, from American University of Armenia. He is the author of the story collection The Return of Caucasus and the trilogy of novels Mommyland. Recently, Los Angeles Review of Books presented him as one of the superheroes of contemporary Armenian literature. He's a board member of Human Rights House Yerevan, TIAC, and Political Dialogue NGO, president of PEN Armenia since 2017. I'll be happy to introduce you to Paata Shamugia when he's here, so let's just start our discussion. So first of all, thank you all for being here today, especially Andrey, due to circumstances. So my first question will be to you, Andrey. Can you maybe please tell us where you are and what's happening around you?
Well, I'm in western Ukraine, not very far away from Hungarian border, together with my older son and my wife, who are working with refugees all the time, around the clock. My son is actually involved in helping to transport chronicle patients of different Ukrainian hospitals across the border and hand them over to special volunteers who are taking them to hospitals in France, Italy, and Germany for further treatment. And I'm stationed here. I'm writing articles and reporting on the events, and also meeting a lot of people who are from all regions of Ukraine, and from time to time going abroad to take part in different events dedicated to situation in Ukraine and Russian-Ukrainian relations.
Thank you, Andrey. Welcome to Paata. No worries. We just started, and then let me just say a few words about Paata, and so that he can join, like immediately jump into our discussion. So Paata, who doesn't really need any introduction, but I just want to say that according to Wikipedia, is the most influential and provocative contemporary Georgian poet, and everyone who walked with him in the streets of Tbilisi knows that it's hard to avoid any attention. One of his latest books, She's a Poems, became a best-selling book in Greece. The Esquire magazine selected it as the top 10 readers' favorite books in Greece. So he's PEN Georgia in 2018. since 2018. So, Andrey, back to you. I have just been in Geneva, where there was this UN regional forum on sustainable development, and there was this plenary session where a few members were saying that there is no sustainable development in the region where there is a war. Russia was speaking the last one, and they said two major things that caught my attention. One, they basically insulted all these member states, saying that everything you say about Russia, it's a lie. And then the second thing is that, which really caught my attention, was they said that in Ukraine we will go till the end, and then you all will know what the actual truth is. So my question to you, Andrey, is Russia left Kiev now, but continues its offensive in other regions. So do you think that they will go till the end? Does it has any resources to go till the end? And what is the end? And what does it mean for the larger region? Can you tell us?
Well, yes, Russian army withdrew from Kiev region, from Chernigov region and Sumy region because they didn't have enough resources and because they didn't expect such a resistance from Ukrainian army. To go to the end for Russia means actually to fight until Putin is dead. Because while he is alive, of course, the Russian army will be fighting and will try to regain the territories, occupy more territories. It's clear that they are not capable of doing this, which means that they will be using more airstrikes and more missiles, and apparently they even lack now missiles, because Lavrov was traveling recently to China and North Korea asking for more ammunition. So Ukraine, as I can see, is prepared for this fight, because this is the question of existence of independent Ukraine. And for Ukrainians, freedom is more important than money or stability, and more important than life for many of Ukrainians. So this war will go on as long as it takes to defend Ukrainian territory or to stop the war by different other means, including diplomatic means or mixed military and diplomatic means. Yeah, but
is actually China interested in supporting Russia in this sense? It seems like it's more neutral, like taking this more neutral stance right now.
No, China, I think, as I know, China refused to help militarily. China can help probably secretly in different ways just to help them to avoid sanctions. But North Korea probably is prepared to help militarily. But with ammunition, of course, not with any kind of soldiers or resources. And it's clear that actually Russian army doesn't have motivation to fight, because, I mean, they understand that they are aggressors. And what happened after Bucha, Irpin, and Mariupol, I mean, the Western countries can see what kind of morale is present among the Russian military and Russian soldiers. So it's clear we are talking here about genocide and about crimes against humanity. So, I mean, the discussions regarding Hague, the Court of Human Rights and International Court in Hague, and I think it's somewhere in Geneva. I mean, it's a serious business to discuss war crimes. So Russia, and there are more than 5,000 war crimes already documented, committed on Ukrainian territory by Russian army.
Thank you. So Paata, now the question to you. You were 9 years old when you had to leave Abkhazia. You were in your 20s when the Russian-Georgian War happened. So basically you formed as a person, as a writer, seeing Russian fighting with your people. So now, as an established writer, seeing all what's happening, what would you say? Like some political scientists say that what Russia is doing in Ukraine is like a defensive imperialism, meaning that necessity of expansion is always explained with threats, and if you don't expand, you are in grave danger. We also all remember what Václav Havel said, that the biggest Russian problem is like that it doesn't know where it starts and where it ends. So what do you think is the Russian strategy, how it changed over the years, if it changed, if there is a strategy, what do you think?
Hello everybody. Sorry. Thank you for having me. And sorry, I was late, but I was stuck in a traffic jam and could not come in time. So as for the question, obviously I have no precise answer to this question, because no one knows what is the actual reason, actual purpose of Russia and Russian imperialism. The only thing I know is that I'm one of the victims of this political ideology. I don't even know, is that ideology? Because imperialists, dictators, tyrants can be leftists, right-wings, anybody. So it's something destructive, something that destroys everything that is, close to it. Like, we unfortunately cannot relocate our country, relocate ourselves. Russia is our neighbor, so we have to, somehow deal with this country, but I don't know how. I was 9-year-old when I was kicked out of Abkhazia, so I remember all this stuff, and it never ends. It happens. It happened in Abkhazia, then in Samachablo, so-called, Tskhinval region. Now it's both these regions are occupied, and now it happens in Ukraine. So it's like we are in a nightmare, and we're seeing some bad dreams right now. So that's how I feel it. I don't know. Many people say that this is something that this is the end of Russian imperialism. This is the last chance for Russian imperialism, which is lost. I don't know. I don't know, because many people, children, older people, innocent people, peaceful people die there, and it has no end. We should, everybody, do something. I personally cannot do something, and it makes me even more depressed. But that's how it is.
Well, maybe you can. Maybe we all can in our little capacity. I think that's probably what we actually should do, what we can. So just a follow-up question, so how it changed personally you and Georgian people, and how the recent situation also changed Georgian people?
Of course it has changed many things. It has changed our psychology, our relation to Russia. Before that war, probably there was quite good relation between Russia and Georgia, in a political level, in a on a daily basis or whatever. Everything was like it should be between two neighbors. And after that war, of course, everything has changed. Everything has changed. The way that we feel like we are completely oppressed, and we could not find any justice because we are a very small country, and we have such a big neighbor who has the eternal, kind of tension to absorb all the neighbors, and it's like Putin's biggest dream to absorb and destroy everybody. As Machiavelli said, it's kind of Machiavellism. If we talk about ideologies, then we can refer it to the Machiavellism, because Machiavelli wrote, I don't remember the exact quote, but this is, I will paraphrase it. The war is the peace is the interval of two wars. So war is something that happens every time, and peace is just, some kind of small break between two wars. And that's how Putin probably considers life in general, and that, but I don't think that he feels how people suffer even Russians. They are under pressure, of course, regular Russians, regular citizens of Russia. They are under pressure, they are, oppressed totally, and especially in this situation when you cannot even pronounce or say some specific words like war and so on, maybe some other words also. And one guy was detained because he was reading just War and Peace maybe 2 days ago. So that's how I feel, how I personally feel. I don't even know how to express it properly, because it's something that I always avoid to speak about, to be honest, and to write about it. I have never written any piece of poems about Abkhazia, for example, about my past, about my history when I was, when I became a refugee, and how it felt like. I never have written things like that, because I don't know. I think I avoid this thing because I want to avoid to be re-traumatized or something. I don't know. I don't even know. So that's my general feeling.
Thank you so much. So, speaking of war and peace, I turn to Armen, to you right now. So, in the context of Russian expansionism, in this Russian role in war/peace, what would you say about this recent discussion, recent preparation for the agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan, brokered by Russians? How does it tie into the larger Russian strategy in the region?
That's a tough question. Actually, there is no peace agreement yet, but I do hope that we'll get one. But before that, I just want to salute Andrey, that he really made it and joined us.
Thank you.
So nice to see you, to meet you online. I hope that in the nearest future we'll have a chance to meet and celebrate together literature beyond borders, as it is written in our charter, PEN Charter, which is the universal document, bringing all us together. Thank you, Andrey, and thank you, Paata, for sharing personal story also. And coming back to and thank you all for being with us. And coming back to your question, Russian expansionism is not something new. I mean, the history of colonization of this region, it's more or less 2 centuries going on, and this is an ongoing process all the time. So there was no decolonization as a successful project, though the Georgians' attempt is more or less successful. But in case of Armenia and Azerbaijan, we are kind of, we are strategic partners, and Azerbaijan and Armenia with Russia. Azerbaijan recently, just before the war, 1 day before the war, they signed some kind of agreement. And in this case, Armenia's position is kind of tragicomic, because we are like a bride of Frankenstein or Dracula or some kind of monster, demon, I don't know. So there are no many choices for us there, but there is hope, because Armenia is young democracy and trying hard to keep I mean, we don't have gas, we don't have oil, we don't have anything. All we have is our democracy and our freedom, and we'll hopefully somehow survive after all this. I don't know. When the real tragedy is going on, I mean, and so much suffering we see in Ukraine, so people of Armenia, some people of Armenia are pro-Putin, and that's not, I mean, everybody knows. Civil society is more anti-Russia nowadays, and the position is government, as we see all, is kind of, you know, to be balanced somehow, which I don't support, of course. So that's the case. That's the case. And we also passed through war in Karabakh 2 years ago, and have a, you know, post-war trauma. I mean, as someone coming from such a complicated situation, I know that all these national phobias, like Turkophobia that we have, and it's I mean, all these traumas that historically stayed unhealed are kind of, you know, bringing you to a dead end. And what is the question was here, what will be the end? I mean, the end is clear. In historical perspective, Russia has lost already. There is no chances, I mean, for them. Democracy is winning, and it's a fact. Because democracy is unpredictable. That's a good moment of democracy. And in case of dictatorship, and you don't have choices. I mean, you are just going to the dead end, and that will happen. Unfortunately, we don't know when. Tomorrow, after 6 months, after a year, nobody can say. But at the end is clear. Russia has already lost. That's for sure.
Thank you, Armen. I like this. I'd like to go back to your point about Armenia as a young democracy and some hope. I'm like picking in the sometimes very hopeless situation. I'm trying to pick like some phrases of hope. So what do you think is the role of literature, Armenian literature, how the war changes literature? And maybe it's a question to all of you guys, how the war in your countries and like this situations, difficult situations we are talking about, change the literature. Who will first?
Yeah, of course it changes everything, including literature. For example, I cannot write anything right now because I feel there is no. I'm completely absorbed with this, informations about war. I'm just, I just scroll down all the time. That's the main activity I do every day. So I cannot even think about something else but war. And this is how it affects me personally. Of course, some other writers, other poets feel differently. They write permanently about this situation, about the war. I cannot.
Andrey, can you tell us about the situation in Ukraine, how war changes literature?
Well, I think nobody is writing fiction now. Everybody is, if somebody is writing something, it is non-fiction, it's about the war, it is reports, it's actually witness accounts, but most of the writers are involved in, I would say, in civic actions, in humanitarian aid, in different projects not connected with actually writing. I mean, like I was talking yesterday to Andrey Kurkov, who stayed in Kiev all the time. He is a very popular crime story writer and children's books writer. And he was taking humanitarian aid to Bucha 2 days ago. The civilians are not allowed on the territory of the Bucha because still they are demining the territory and there are lots of traps left by Russian soldiers. So he was actually offered to put a military clothing at the checkpoint and went in the town. And what he told me, I mean, this can be a non-fiction, this can be a piece of diary, and I wrote it down because, I mean, there are lots of abandoned dogs and cats whose owners are killed by Russian soldiers. And they are afraid of people now. And he was trying to take one cat home to Kiev. And actually one cat, he managed to hold to one cat, and he walked across the block post, across the checkpoint. And once he left the checkpoint, actually the cat got out from his hands, jumped, and returned to the burned territory of Bucha. So, I mean, I'm sure you will hear and you will read lots of stories like this after the war. But during the war, I think not many writers are writing. Although there are diaries, and there are diaries, for example, published by Ukrainian young writer Markian Kamish, who is very popular in Italy. And I think La Repubblica or La Stampa are publishing almost every 2 days his diaries about life in Kiev. So these texts will survive and will remind us about today's reality in Ukraine. But at the same time, as I said, most of the writers are involved more in physical humanitarian activities than in reflecting on what is happening now.
Thank you.
So yes, but there is this perception that war is not the best time for creating, writing, and some of us are really stressed out, and some of us are in writer's block. but there is a good news also. See around, I mean, see the whole world is so much inspired with the fight that Ukrainian people, I mean, they're brave, courage, etc. And there is a lot of creativity around. Even in Ukraine, we see a lot of creativity. That's the thing that we don't see, for example, in Russia, because Russia is like, you know, really dumb. And yes, during the war, I mean, this situation inspired a lot of people around the world. I would say the whole humanity to do something creative, to do something out of box, to revalue some, you know, stereotypes. And this is one of the positives, if we can call it positive, but positive things that's really going around. We see a lot of street art, for example, all over Europe. We see a lot of text that has been translated. I mean, there is a huge translation movement, and a lot of people are interested, and a lot of people are eager to read something, you know, originally written in Ukraine or from Ukrainian authors, etc. So this is kind of a support. I mean, I myself, I am a pacifist, and I understand how stupid this can sound. I mean, in this situation, like, you know, a little bit snobbish. I'm washing my hands and I don't want these blood things, etc. But even pacifists like me can do something. They can write, they can raise their voices. Then creativity gives us this space to support somehow, because I can't take a weapon and go and volunteer for this war. I'm against any armed conflict. But what I can do is, I mean, and a lot of us can do, be more creative. I don't know, simple things like, you know, donating or joining some teams who are doing some good stuff. That's the thing. So I don't think that war is completely blocking us as Creative Commons. It is also giving us space to rethink ourselves. And one of the things that happened in Armenia and Azerbaijan, for example, is that the literatures, our literatures has been so national, in a bad way, probably, that they hadn't this power to prevent conflict, to you know, prepare readerships for dialogue. And that's the thing that we should change. And this will happen through, I suppose, through dialogue, cultural dialogue, translation projects, and in a way this conference is also doing that. I mean, bringing some people from Azerbaijan, Georgia, Armenia, other countries together for a couple of days. This is kind of a peace activity, deeply. Yeah.
I completely agree, and what's more, yeah, it's very inspiring, the bravery. It's absolutely inspiring, and I personally have learned the entire Ukrainian anthem by heart. Yeah, and it's very good piece of music, by the way. So I loved it. But on what I, before this war, there were so many novels and poems written in Ukraine about war, as if they predicted this war, or they had some expectation, bad expectation, I don't know. If my memory serves me correctly, Times selected 50 novels about war from the past decade, Ukrainian novels. So it's too much, 50 novels about wars, about war. So I don't know, was it somehow related to some, feelings, to some, as if they predicted this war, I don't know, but that was the actual fact.
Well, I don't know if there is ever too much literature, even about war. Literature helps us to understand and think through and maybe, as you said, prevent certain conflicts, hopefully. But anyway, I'm glad that we have Armen with his positivity in Georgia, so that he can share it with Paata eventually. So since I have 3 PEN presidents here, I cannot not to ask you a question about freedom of expression. So Russian journalists have been massively fleeing Russia to Georgia since the beginning of war, in a hope that this country is free and they will feel safe here. And what happens next is that in the first few days of war, there is this journalist from independent Russian media that is stopped on the border and not allowed to come to the country. Also, there are writers going to Armenia, and they are afraid to open bank accounts because they fear that there will be like information shared between the countries because of the relations between Armenia and Russia. There is, of course, war in Ukraine, and journalists are killed and kidnapped and tortured. So, can you maybe share with us your vision? What is happening with the freedom of expression in your countries, and what is in the future? What are you predicting in the nearest future?
Well, I don't think that we have freedom of expression. We have, of course, we can say whatever we need, but I don't think that this is what we dreamt about. This is something, completely corrupted understanding of freedom of expression, because we see every day how government tries to censor even, literary world, and you know quite well what happened around the writer's house of Georgia regarding litera and so on. They want to just censor any field of our life. Like they changed all the heads of the, like national museums because they did not match their political ideology and so on. So what is that? It's just censorship. It's like political pressure. So can we talk about freedom of expression when we see things like that in our everyday life? I think no. I understand that Georgian government does not actually represent Georgian people. Most of Georgian people stand with Ukraine, support Ukraine, and our government, just keeps silent.
Andrey, What do you think about the situation with freedom of expression, especially what's going to happen in these areas occupied by Russia? You've seen this already in Crimea, that all the independent media had to leave. What do you expect going to happen now?
Well, first of all, I wanted to comment briefly on Paata's words regarding 50 books about the war. The first books about Russian-Ukrainian war were written and published in Russia, and they were written in genre of so-called boevaya fantastika in the end of 1990s. And if you check the list of books which are anti-Ukrainian published and written in Russia, you will find that there are much more than 50. And one of them is one of the last books of Eduard Limonov, Kiev Kaput. So it's not Ukrainians who started writing first books about the war. The books about the war were written in Ukraine after 2014 by war veterans, Donbass war veterans, and we have now two literatures. One is written by war veterans and one is written by traditional writers. Regarding freedom of expression on the occupied territories, of course there can be no freedom of expression. I mean, we have members of PEN now on the occupied territories, and they are reporting, of course, secretly about what is happening there. So the journalists are kidnapped, some of them are never returned, especially in Melitopol. There was actually only one journalist returned because he had also Israeli citizenship and Israel interfered. So he and his family were freed, but the others were not returned. And there is no freedom of expression there automatically. If you talk about Ukraine, I mean, it's not very compatible to talk about freedom of expression in the time of the war. I mean, I express what I want, I publish what I want, nobody censors my text or my TV interviews, etc. So, I mean, in this sense, I would expect more censorship in the war-torn country than we have now. But we will have also to safeguard freedom of expression after the war, so that the patriotic feelings wouldn't limit freedom of expression, which is a normal and quite natural reaction after each war. I know what was happening in Croatia because I was there during the war and after the war. So, I mean, the question of freedom of expression will be actual and very important, not now, but mostly after the war is over.
Okay, I think the situation with freedom of expression in Armenia and Georgia are kind of similar. Now it's fine. But there are some problems. Of course, we don't know. Situation can drastically change. And but what we witnessed after the Velvet Revolution of 2018 is that a constant media war in Armenia going on between the, let's call them so-called pro-governmental medias and medias owned by oligarchy, which used to be in power for decades, so they still have own much of them. And there is a small corner left for the really free medias that are not changing the tone. So the war is ongoing till now. And there is another problem also. I mean, I can't even compare, for example, with Turkey, where we have so many in-jailed journalists and writers. In Armenia, we don't have. But the thing is that Armenian society is kind of banning free words in a way that it is very critical to any critical thinking, let's say, and very conservative. And there is this internal censorship in journalists, let's say, writing always with this internal censor inside. Oh, this is pro-Armenian or anti-Armenian, should I write this or not? There is this false discourse also between freedom and security, freedom vs security, which is quite popular now in Armenia. So some people think that security is #1 value now and freedom can wait for a while, which is completely irrelevant in my personal opinion, because freedom and security and all this stuff, they are coming like together. It's a bouquet. It's all together. You can't have this antagonism. That's it pretty much, yeah.
Thank you. I also want to leave some time for questions, so I'm going to ask you my last question as a representative of PEN America. I'm particularly interested in what the West, this collective West that writes a lot about Ukrainian war, war in Ukraine right now, for example, but it's a question to all of you. What did West get wrong about the wars in your countries? So I probably will ask Andrey first, since we see a lot of articles, New York Times writes about situation in Ukraine every day. So what do you think we get wrong, and how we can learn from it, and how we can do a better job in the future?
Well, I don't want to sound fatalistic, but Europe will not learn a lot, because partially the politicians were naive, partially they were pragmatic, and for them actually trade with Russia was more important than human rights, just like trade with other countries with authoritarian regime. So only because of the practical crimes of the humanity, the serious sanctions are imposed on Russia. But once the situation is over, I'm quite sure that the trade will be re-established, and Ukraine maybe will be more paid attention to, but will not become the issue or reason for European leaders to change their policies. Angela Merkel started building Nord Stream 2 together with Putin after annexation of Crimea, after beginning of war in Donbass, after the war in Georgia and bombing of Tskhinval. Which means that actually she was still thinking more about future relations with Russia than future relations with Georgia or Ukraine. And I think the politicians like her will reappear on the European scene. I cannot say the same about America, because Americans were trying hard to tell Europeans what is happening and what will happen in the future. And Americans were telling also Ukrainian politicians what can happen, and they were not listened attentively to. So in this sense, I hope that in the future Ukrainian politicians will be much more, not pragmatic, but much more intelligent in studying intelligence that they are shared with, and will think about security of the state. Of course, I mean, I do hope Ukraine will become a member of the European Union, and that will be some sort of protection. But also, although the promises are done by the European Union, it can take years and years.
Well, I don't think that any institution or any organization or any country is able to prevent us from war. You know, obviously, that in the beginning of 20th century there was founded the Nations of League, which supposed to prevent us from war and you know, to be safeguard of democracy and peace and so on, and it did not work. It was not enough, probably, and I think that the West's effort is, you know, quite good, but it's still not enough. We need, and everybody, every peaceful people, every people who supports now oppressed Ukraine, every people think that it's not enough. We need more defense. We need to be prevented from like big empires.
Yeah, I'll echo Paata. It's not enough, of course. But I'm not here to criticize Western policy, because I'm not a politician, you know. What I see is a drastic change. I mean, Europe is trying hard to do something. And let's see, for example, Germany. I mean, Germany, it was a golden rule there to never be involved somehow in this bloodland policies, I mean, armed conflicts, etc. But now what we see in Germany, from the leftists to rightists, conservative, nationalists, liberals, all came together, and all came together to support Ukraine. And this is a mental challenge also for Europe. Europe is also passing through, you know, revaluing some, or Scandinavian countries like Sweden, for example, which has been natural for decades, and now they support this cause of Ukraine, so, and provide some weapons also, which is good thing to do, and I think that it's not enough, obviously. What is our call here to everyday Europeans, let's say, that they can also support and push their governments a little bit further to make them really more, you know, proactive in this way. But it will take time, I don't know. There is another moment also that Western world also is kind of in its bubble. From one side we have, you know, Putin with a completely crazy guy in his bubble and wishful thinking, and we see a lot of stereotypes in Western world also, and some politicians don't even know the situation, don't know the roots of the conflict, etc., etc. There is a lot of educational things also that should happen, and but this war is making us, all of us, more educated, and making us, you know, to read more books, for example, about Ukraine, to understand who are these guys, who is this nation, so brave and, you know, struggling for freedom. Because every human being in the world now has this feeling, kind of being pro-Ukrainian is natural. It's like being pro-democracy. It's like being pro-human rights. I don't know the situation in Georgia, for example, how it's perceived in this. For example, do majority of Georgians understand that by being pro-Ukrainian, it automatically means also to be pro-gay rights, for example? No, they are pro-Ukrainian, but probably no gay rights. But this is all interconnected. This is the same discourse. So this is fight not only between two countries, an aggressor that wants a big fish to swallow a small fish, but it's a fight for democracy and human rights as well. So human rights are there. And what we see in Ukraine, for example, we see that it's not a national or ethnic national conflict. We see a lot of Armenians, Ukrainian Armenians fighting, like 500,000 Armenians living in Ukraine, and they are, majority of them are citizens of Ukraine, and they are struggling for their homeland, their country. So, I don't know, we have Sergei Nigoyan, one of the victims, first victims of Maidan, young guy, 20-year-olds. I mean, we have such figures also there. And we see that the conflict is not ethnic, and it's not historical, as sometimes some, you know, people want to preserve it. And this is purely about self-defense, about being, you know, independent, and about decommunization in a way also. That was a process that we couldn't overcome in this region.
Thank you, Armen. And I want to repeat your words about reading more Ukrainian books about Ukraine and Ukrainian authors as well. I think it's a very important and a good ending of our conversation. And like now, I want to turn to the audience and ask if there are any questions to our speakers. Please raise your hand. Yes. Can someone help with the microphone? Yes.
Hello. It's actually not a question. Just wanted to send my warm regards to Andrey Kurkov. We have your book in our bookstores in Azerbaijan, and we've been selling it for years, and I have read it. I love it, The Ukrainian Diary. And on behalf of my bookstores, we have Ukrainian flags all over my bookstores. On behalf of my nation, all Azerbaijanis support Ukraine. I just wanted to send you my warmest regards. We stand with Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have more comments or questions? Yes, please.
I'm just curious if you can comment a little bit, because my impression as an American is that this is actually a global war. What we've seen is 75,000 foreign students trapped in Ukraine, Indians, Nigerians. I mean, so everybody's really drawn into this conflict. And I'm just curious, as neighbors, I mean, certainly journalists in the Baltics have been well aware of this. Lithuanians were one of the few people that actually still had journalists in Donbass. To what extent was Europe just asleep? And really, I mean, I always felt as an American journalist that there was a certain amount of smugness about the lack of defense budgets and the lack of paying attention, and that globalization was going to solve this problem, and now it's the globe's problem. I'm just curious.
Well, I can start maybe, if you don't mind. I took part in the Orange Revolution. I was present at the Euromaidan, and I noticed a very interesting tendency that during Orange Revolution, all main media of the world sent their journalists to Kyiv. During Euromaidan, it was like, oh, this is Ukraine again. We won't spend that much money. So the main medias asked their correspondents in Moscow to come to Kyiv and to cover it. And of course, the view of these Russophiles, journalists who spoke Russian and were in love with Russia, it was already a bit different. On February, before the war in Ukraine, actually before 24th of February this year, this was the record number of foreign journalists coming to Ukraine to witness the beginning of the war. So the interest is back, and it was obviously done so because the people in the media understood that this is the war which will touch the whole of the world. It will not be a local war. And it is true, it is war between two civilizations, between past and the future. I mean, for me, it's always interesting to see the photos of Ukrainian President, young Jewish Russian-speaking Vladimir Zelensky, and old, fragile, unhappy Vladimir Putin, who is always gray and pale. And so, I mean, this is the war between future and the past. It's about actually Western democratic civilization and authoritarian regime. And in this sense, you are right. And I hope that this war and what is happening now in Ukraine will not disappear from the front pages of international publications, which can happen if something else turns up, another tsunami or something. Because it's difficult to keep attention of readers with the news from one and the same place.
Thank you. Do we have anything to add? Thank you. Okay. More questions? We probably have time for one more question, if there is one. Okay. So then, with this, I would like to thank our wonderful writers, our superheroes, and thank you for your time and for navigating us in this land of confusion. I would like to thank our audience for coming today, and with this, I will close the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Rach. Bye-bye.